Hello, everyone. My name is Daryl Everett Patterson Jr., and I am a student in the Trinity Law Master of Legal Studies program. And today I will be discussing my media exercise assignment on an article entitled Man Loses $100,000 Property in Delaware Beach Community After Neighbor Claims Squatters' Rights. And so this is a story on a court case revolving around a dispute in regards to adverse possession of a property and the ongoings and the details and more to come. Thank you. So let's discuss the details of this case. A parcel of land valued between $100,000 and $125,000 had become adversely possessed by Melissa Schrock, a neighbor of the title holder, Burton Banks. After decades of very limited use, Burton Banks sought to sell a portion of his Ocean View property to a suitor in 2021. So in the year 2021, he actually got the land surveyed and valued, and it was estimated to be about $125,000 in value, enough to appeal as far as the decision to possibly sell it by way of Burton Banks. Through a descendable means of acquiring a property interest, he inherited the acre of land from his father. And so descendable land is land that is inherited. And this is how Burton Banks ultimately received ownership or the title to this land. Schrock had been operating a goat pen on the land for decades. Burton discovered this fact in 2021 as he began to explore the possibilities of selling the land for an estimated market value of $125,000. And so it's one of these things where when you notice in any concept or discussion of adverse possession, the notion that a certain amount of time is required to occupy or utilize land with certain key requirements that actually validate its authenticity. And so in this regard, as the case details go, when you read into the dispute, there is an adjacent neighbor that is utilizing the land, making beneficial or productive use, while the land is actually owned and the title is owned by the neighbor that is not necessarily utilizing the land for beneficial use. And so now we'll go into the next phase of discussion in regards to this property dispute. So as far as the case details, Burton Banks actually filed a complaint to have Melissa Schrock removed from the acre of land that she was utilizing with her goat pen, in addition to additional usage. And this actually prompted Melissa to consider the notion that she had squatters' rights or adverse possession capability. And believing in her entitlement to squatters' rights, Schrock filed a counter complaint against Banks, arguing that adverse possession of the land was valid and it was tied to the animal enclosure and to land that was even beyond that. And so Burton Banks essentially filing a complaint against Melissa Schrock prompted her to file a counter complaint that would ultimately open the court case up to a dispute of to who the actual ownership and title of the land would be given to. And so for as adverse possession to ultimately be something that can be validated, there are a key set of requirements that Melissa Schrock had to fulfill in order to convince the judge and the court to grant her ownership of the land. And according to a little-known adverse possession code in the Diamond State, which allows people to claim ownership of property that is not technically theirs by occupying it for at least 20 years, Melissa Schrock had met the requirements to legally obtain the title to Burton Banks' acre of land. So that's something amazing to consider, that for 20 years, 2 decades or more, Melissa Schrock actively utilized the land and in an open manner, in addition to additional characteristics or attributes that qualify adverse possession as being valid. And therefore, you had somewhat this thwarted interest by way of Burton Banks having intention to sell the land that Melissa was occupying. And it's amazing to note that at the point in which he surveyed the land and got it appraised, there was additional user that was also making utilization of the land. And that user actually evacuated the premises. However, Melissa Schrock, understanding that she had some level of legal entitlement and ultimately the possibility to claim full ownership of the land, remained and challenged Burton Banks. To suffice provisions for adverse possession claims, a squatter or occupant's use of land would have to be open and notorious, continuous and uninterrupted, exclusive, actual, not welcome or hostile, and at the same time, the taxes to this land would have to be paid. So these are a set of key requirements that ultimately have some level of high degree of difficulty in fulfilling when considering that there would be a true owner or a title-based owner that would have jurisdiction or ownership over the land in which these requirements would have to be made. And so in being able to fulfill those requirements, that would be convincing in the courtroom, and ultimately it would lead to Melissa Schrock obtaining ownership of the property. The judge's ruling. And so Banks and his companion would occasionally visit the Ocean View property when away from their Atlanta home, which Superior Court Judge Craig Carson determined was enough in probability to observe Schrock openly making use of his land throughout the 20-year time interval. And so in adverse possession, where you have a given or allotted amount of time, if in fact an owner is regularly visiting, assessing, surveying, or even checking out the land or property that they own, that would give them sufficient and I would say an optimal amount of opportunity to observe or catch someone utilizing their property. So the fact that Burton Banks and his companion were making this claim that they would regularly visit the Ocean View property in Delaware, yet lived in Atlanta, seems somewhat flawed, being that Melissa Schrock had a goat pen on the land, which is visible, openly visible, and the land was undeveloped largely, whereby there was no property to essentially cover up the usage or block the usage from view in plain sight. And so when the judge was actually assessing this case, the open doctrine within the adverse possession greater doctrine says that there has to be open and continuous use. And over a 20-year time period, if Melissa Schrock is actively utilizing this land for not just the function that the goat pen would provide, but for complementary uses, then in fact, Burton Banks, he or his companion, would have detected that usage, intervened, and somewhat or somehow prevented the adverse possession possibility from playing out in favor of Melissa Schrock. And so Schrock squatted and adversely possessed the land adjacent to her property for over 20 years, making use of not only the area where the goat pen was located, but the remaining 2/3 of the complete acre as well. Judge Carson ruled in favor of Schrock's claim to the land and conveyed her its title and property interests in February of 2023. A key factor in the judge's decision was the fact that Schrock made beneficial use of the undeveloped land, cultivating goats and maintaining the aesthetic aspects of the property. And that's the key fact when we actually think about why adverse possession is even something that is legally ordained by the American legal system. It's based on the premise that the American legal system favors the beneficial usage of land as far as its impact on the surrounding community, the economy through economic activity, and ultimately the maintaining of the aesthetic beautification component of the land usage or property use. Melissa Schrock describes the property adjacent to her childhood home, of which she inherited from her mother, who actually purchased the land from Mr. Burton's father. as her backyard, a space she grew up within and spent a considerable portion of her lifetime. So, in fact, Melissa Schrock had a unique connection to the land. The land was considered her backyard, a space where she could have recreational and meaningful experiences, in addition to somewhere that she could have productive, beneficial usage through having a goat pen and complementary activities that will ultimately characterize and, how can I say, build a connection to the land in which she ultimately claimed title and ownership over and was legally provided that title and ownership. And so this is an example of when adverse possession is, I would say, permissible by way of the meeting of key requiring factors that ultimately indicate whether or not someone is making beneficial usage of the land and making beneficial usage of that land for a specified amount of time that will ultimately qualify them as the true owner and indeed the wielder of that property interest or title. Thank you for listening, and I appreciate it.